Whips, a novel. Written by Andy Jones and narrated by the author. Chapter 1. Jacob Terry knew he was going to die when they first took him. They didn't bother to wear masks. It was quick. He dropped his phone, hit his foot before it landed on the ground with a crack. At least two of them, one on each arm, lifting him hard off the ground and pushing him into the van at speed. One of them dropped a black bag on his head, and the other strapped him into a seat. It was too solid to be a seatbelt. They used something else, like a chain of some kind. It clamped tight around his chest, and for a moment he was scared that it was too tight and he wouldn't be able to breathe in. He could, luckily, but it wasn't easy. The van's engine was already running as he got in. He felt the hard acceleration seconds later, the door sliding shut as they moved away. Did anyone notice him on the street? It was pretty quiet. Even if they did notice him, it was over so quickly. How could they have understood what they saw? His breathing was harder still because of the speed they were driving. He just tried to slow it down. He counted. 3 seconds in. 3 seconds out. That felt better. Then they hit a hard left, and he felt his chest and stomach ram against the chain. He was winded, but was able to suck air back in through the stale black hood. It hung heavy on his head, but thankfully, the men who took him didn't tighten it. He figured they wanted him lucid, not constrained. They'd listen, because they'd be interested in what he had to say. They'd give him space to talk. Maybe, he thought, they could be persuaded to let me go. He talked himself out of some pretty hairy situations back in the day. But no, he thought. They weren't wearing masks. They didn't care about me seeing them. The realization hit him like a wave, with more impact than the violent high-speed turns that the van was making. This was it. He was dead. Would he scream? Call out? Plead for his life? Or would he stand tall? Refuse to beg to these men? He understood, even in that moment, that there was no way of knowing what he'd do until it happened. The men were professionals, clearly. Not just for how cleanly and efficiently they grabbed him and bundled him into the van. But even now, speeding through this part of London, they were silent. Each man knew his part, and played it with no fuss. He'd lost count of the minutes they'd been in the van, until it came to a screeching halt. The relief to feel that oppressive chain lift off his body almost gave him a second wind. He heard the door slide open and felt himself being lifted up and out again. These guys must have been strong. Terry had put on the pounds over the last few years, a middle-aged spread building up. But the extra weight seemed to be of no concern to those who took him. There was the cool wind of the outdoors for no more than 30 seconds before they were inside. It was quiet. He got the sense of space at first, the men's heavy footsteps echoing off into the distance. The clink of the metal chain following him too. Must have been a third man carrying it behind them. Maybe the driver of the van? Then the sounds became thin, short. A smaller space, less acoustic reverb, as they moved him briskly into a hallway. Then a solid wood door opened into another room. There wasn't time to get his head around it all, before he was pushed harshly into an uncomfortable plastic chair and the same chain wrapped around him again. It wasn't as aggressive the second time around. He could breathe easier. He expected to be blinded by the light when the hood was pulled away. But it was evening when they took him, and the room was dark. No lights. Just 3 phantom figures standing in front of him. Lean, muscular, in dark t-shirts that fit tightly, camouflage trousers. They all looked like military men. The one in the middle knelt down. He was tall, and his eyeline matched Terry's almost perfectly. He rubbed the back of his head as he studied Terry's face, like how someone would study the fine details of an old oil painting. As he leant forward, Terry saw more of his face. A street lamp or something outside left a soft glow in the room. The man had a scar on his left cheek, visible through the 2-day-old stubble. A shaved army haircut. "Jacob Terry," the man eventually said. A statement, not a question. His voice was gruff. And the accent. East London, maybe? "What?" Terry swallowed, caught off by the dryness of his own throat. "What do you want from me? Who are you?" "You've been a naughty boy," the man in the middle said, his scar even more pronounced, as he tilted his head to the side. A very faint smirk. "Let me go," said Terry, trying as hard as he could to sound angry rather than pleading. "Sorry, sir," said the man. "We have our orders." "Look, is this about a story I'm doing?" said Terry, knowing full well what story this was about. "Whatever it is, maybe we can work it out. My employer could compensate you if you think I've been inappropriate in any way." Terry was listening to himself speak, thinking, what the hell are you babbling on about? The man kneeling down, with his scar illuminated by the streetlight, smirked again. "We're not here to work anything out. We already know what you know. We just need confirmation on who you've been working with and where we can find him." "Working with on what? Tell me what you think I've done," said Terry, though as clear as the pounding of his heart. He knew exactly why he was there. And the man kneeling down knew that he knew. He just said, "Tell us who you've been working with on this story. I'm not negotiating. Just tell us how we can get hold of the man you've spoken to." Terry was waiting for the man to say, "Then we'll let you go," or maybe, "If you tell us, we'll make it quick." But no such line followed. Terry took a breath. He'd made up his mind. He wasn't going to plead. He'd be strong. He wasn't going to give these bastards the satisfaction of seeing anything else. He leant forward, as best as he could in the seat, with the chain cutting into him. Then uttered a single word, as clearly and as confidently as he could. "No." The kneeling man smiled, nodded. He slowly got up. "I respect that," he finally said, then turned around as a new figure emerged from the shadows. All 3 of the men in army clothes moved to the side to let the new person through. Terry couldn't make out the figure in the darkness. But once they walked into the light, he recognized the face immediately. In that second, he knew that everything he'd been working on, in the background, in secret, for 3.5 months, was true. There had been just one final piece of the puzzle he had yet to unearth. And now that piece was standing over him, impassive. Before he could speak again, the figure stepped to one side, and Terry was faced once more with the scar-faced man, who had a silenced pistol pointed right at him. Terry tried to say something, anything, before the room went black. Nathan Hansen lowered the pistol. The kickback and suppressed yelps satisfying. watching Jacob Terry, this middle-aged black man with the scruffy goatee, fall backwards. The impact of the bullet into his forehead snapping the neck back. He was dead before the chair fell backwards onto the floor. Without needing to say a word, his two men started unlocking the chain around Jacob Terry's body and pulled the chair from under him. 2 seconds later, they started wrapping the tarpaulin around the limp body. The same tarpaulin they placed there just 2 hours ago, leaving the chair on top. Jacob Terry wouldn't have even noticed he was sitting on top of it. The plastic sheeting, making cleanup of the body much easier. Hansen holstered his pistol and rubbed the scar on his cheek as his men got to work. Quick, efficient, silent. The best there was. Then, they all saw it at the same time. A long, narrow band of light. Erratic. A flashlight. Not pointed at them, just moving around. Turned on and being held lazily in a security guard's hand somewhere close. None of them spoke. They waited for Hansen to make the decision, which he did in 2 seconds.
"Leave the body here,"
he hushed.
"Security weren't supposed to be on tonight. No one will check this room. We'll collect Jacob Terry tomorrow. Now, move."
It was chilly and dark. Rachel Ryan could see her breath in the cold. She was sick of waiting for Mickey. He was late every time. Never an apology. Mickey Hobbs wasn't her informant at the start. He'd been passed down when an MI5 field agent was retiring from the life. Hobbs had been a strong asset, a man who kept his ear to the ground. He usually delivered the goods. Ryan reckoned that he was wrong maybe 3 times out of 10. That was a pretty good hit rate. But she didn't like him. There was never the level of trust he'd had with his old handler. That took years, and Ryan never had the patience. She had to be introduced to Hobbs carefully. It took time, but they were on okay terms now. She looked across at the old car garage. Some motor mechanic business, long since closed down. She'd met Hobbs there more times than she could care to count. One thing was for sure, she was going to be late for dinner again. Her husband Phil would not be happy. There had been too many unexpected late nights. Too many excuses. And in her line of work, she couldn't really tell him what she was up to. He understood it at first. He was enthusiastic, in fact. His wife, the secret agent. Before she moved to field work, the hours were more predictable. She warned him what was coming, but he never really prepared himself for it. Now his great plan, be the stay-at-home dad while Mum played at being James Bond, wasn't working like it used to. A combination of his own promotion at work, plus the school run and kids who weren't babies anymore, had broken their system. And neither of them had the guts to admit it yet. Her thoughts of Phil broke away as soon as she saw Mickey Hobbs sheepishly walking up towards her, hugging the wall of the old car garage and eyeing everything with suspicion. Looking as pale and gaunt as ever. "Sorry," he said, in his weak South London twang. "I had to take the scenic route. Make sure I wasn't followed."
"What is it, Mickey?"
she said, not taking the bait tonight.
"It's big," he said. "Biggest thing I mean, this is serious."
It always is, she thought to herself. But instead, she said, "What do you have for me?"
"Something I've been working up for a few months now, maybe more. I've got a contact, some journo who stumbled onto the same thing I did. I didn't believe it at first, but the more I looked..."
"What have you found?" she interrupted, in no mood for the theatrics.
"The Prime Minister," said Hobbs. "That Malcolm Stewart."
She just gave him a look, then said, "Why? What has he done?" Hobbs came closer. She could smell his body odour. Did the guy ever take a shower?
"I'm serious," he said. "Someone is planning to kill him. Someone big."
After a moment, Ryan said, "This isn't a movie, Mickey. You're going to need to give me something more than that."
I can't," said Mickey. "Not yet."
Hobbs had a flair for the dramatic. But Ryan had to admit there was something different tonight. He sounded, well, afraid. But genuine. Not like usual. Hobbs would build up his intel sometimes. Make it seem bigger than it was. That's how he got paid. But Ryan could detect some actual sincerity in his voice this time. So she turned to him, looked him in the eye, like she was prepared to pay him all the attention he needed. "Mickey, I'm here. I'm listening. I can't do much if you don't give me anything. There's always someone who wants to kill the PM. I need more than that."
"This isn't just some nutter," said Hobbs. "This is a big thing. Just run it up the flagpole back at Thames House, would you? See if you can pick up any chatter."
"Not without any more information," she said, interrupted mid-flow by Hobbs walking off. "Hey, Mickey, where are you going?"
"I knew you wouldn't listen," he shouted behind her. "I'm in too deep and I can't give you no more. Forget it, Ryan. Go home. I'll try another way."
The grand old clock in the Downing Street meeting room chimed for 11:30 at night. It was too late. The Prime Minister, Malcolm Stewart, stretched his arms and yawned. As he did so, his Deputy Chief Whip, Sarah Bates, did the same. They shared a smile. "I'm sorry," said Stewart, pointing at the clock. "I've kept you way past time." "Not a problem," piped up Penny Dester, a standard whip with talent, who he'd only just added into his inner circle recently. Stewart got up and downed the rest of the water in his plastic bottle before placing it up on top of the mantelpiece. He looked at his face in the large mirror hanging over the fireplace. God, he was getting greyer with every day that went by in the job. He'd have to get used to that. What happened to the young, ambitious leader of the opposition from 2 years ago? And how did he turn into a grey-haired old Prime Minister so fast? He turned to face his team. The trusted inner circle. All turned up there an hour ago after he made a call to bring them back to number 10. He had advisors, of course. His SPADs, as they were known. Most PMs trusted the SPADs above all else. But for Malcolm Stewart, he'd grown close to the 3 MPs sitting in the room with him. There was the fatherly Thomas Knight. Old school, a decade or so away from being father of the house, his chief whip. Then there was the fierce Sarah Bates, deputy chief whip. A woman who supported him more than anyone else he knew. She believed in his mission. Also, she knew where the bodies were buried. Strong and cunning. She was able to get even the most difficult backbenchers to comply. Stewart learned quickly it was best not to ask how she did it. And finally, there was Penny Dester. He still wasn't totally sold on her, but Thomas Knight vouched for her. Some said she was an up-and-coming star. Been in the house for 7 years now. A nice safe seat in Essex. It was good for the party to have more MPs of colour in the house, and even better if, like Dester, they were competent. He hoped in time Dester would learn how to get things done like the other 2 whips. but right now she was on probation with him. And she knew it.
"I'll let you get home,"
Stuart said. "I'm sure you all have places you'd rather be." Penny Dester started to stand, taking that as the cue to leave. Then she stopped, noticing the others didn't budge.
"I just need you to push harder," the PM said. "This bill needs to pass, and pass more or less as is."
He knew that all three whips had mixed feelings about his state protection bill. Dester was worried about the civil liberties issue. Knight was concerned that it didn't go far enough. Bates was totally on board, but knew convincing others would be a tough task.
"We'll do our best, Prime Minister,"
said Knight.
"I don't want your best," snapped Stuart. "I need it done. Tell me you've got the numbers. You've got until tomorrow afternoon. Is that clear?"
None of them replied. They had been given their orders.
"Then there's nothing left to discuss," said Stuart,
as he grabbed the plastic bottle off the mantelpiece and walked out of the room. "Go home.